I don't think I've said this publicly before, but this was the first time that I noticed that throughout my life, I think I had been acting tough versus had mental strength.
Our tendency is to, when we're acting tough, is we just want to go around the pain. Sometimes people will come into my therapy office and it might be 10 years after they lost somebody or 20 years, and they'll say, time is supposed to heal everything, but it didn't heal me. Why? Part of that is because they've been acting tough for 10 or 20 years. And the sad part is then they really haven't even started allowing themselves to grieve, which means they're not even there yet when it comes to working on themselves and healing. 70% of the time, it's an event where somebody says, when things are going well in life, I can kind of white knuckle it. And then they're really frustrated or confused why they suddenly hit this wall. And they might say, I've handled 50 other events in my life that were difficult, but this one thing, it really got me. And it might be something surprising.
This episode is brought to you by One Accord. If you're a business owner thinking about a transition or exit in the next few years, listen to me. The number one reason that companies fail to sell or sell for far less than they should is really simple. The business still depends on the owner. You've heard it 1,000 times on this podcast. One Accord's Oasis strategic planning and execution system helps owners build leadership alignment, operational clarity, and discipline execution so they can run and grow without them. That's what creates valuation lift. That's what makes you buyer ready. Everything that I don't tell you listeners get an exclusive free value readiness snapshot to see exactly where your business stands today. All you have to do is go to oneaccord.co/oasis. That's OASYS/Josh Zolin. That's me. oneaccord.co/oasis, OASYS/Josh Zolin to get your complimentary value readiness snapshot today. Now, let's start the show. What is something that our audience thinks that they know about mental strength, but they might be getting wrong?
So I think most people think that it's about being tough, like it's about acting tough. And I hear this all the time, that people say things like, check on your strong friends because they're the ones that need it the most. Or, like nothing bothers me, therefore I'm mentally strong. But I'll also have people come into my therapy office and say, like, I wish I could be mentally strong, but I have depression or I have anxiety. And it's all because we misunderstand what it means to have mental strength. I think we really get it mixed up with acting tough. People will think if you wake up at 3 a.m. and do a cold plunge, then you must clearly be mentally strong. Or they think if you don't have any feelings, then somehow you're the strong one too. But really, mental strength is about being able to ask for help. It might be about having self-discipline. Maybe you get up at 3 a.m., but you don't have to punish yourself, or you don't have to beat yourself up, or you don't have to push yourself like a machine and act like you don't have emotions. Or you don't have to check on your strong friends because they're the friends that are already talking about how they feel. If somebody is not talking about their emotions, or they're not going to be willing to ask for help if they need it, that means they're acting tough. So they're not actually your strong friend. They're just a friend that acts tough. So I think if we had a better understanding of those things, and if we also knew that mental strength and mental health are different, that just like physical health and physical strength are different, like you can go to the gym and work on getting stronger, but you might still have a health problem. I don't know if you have high cholesterol or you have high blood pressure, and lifting weights won't necessarily prevent those things, or it won't cure it. Well, mental strength the same. You might have depression, you might have anxiety, but it's all about the choices you make every day. And we all have room for improvement. We can all build mental strength. And the last time you want to build mental strength is like when you need it. It's kind of like if you have a heavy box to pick up and you start doing some bicep curls 2 minutes before you pick up the box. It doesn't do a lot of good. Mental strength's the same. If you're in the middle of a crisis and you then think, well, I should really practice gratitude right now, it's kind of too late. So it's something that you want to be working on throughout your life, because it's something that we can all work on every single day. And it's not just about then being ready for the crisis to hit, because sometimes people also think strength and resilience are the same, but resilience is about bouncing back when something terrible happens. But I realized in my life, I didn't want to just brace myself for the next horrible thing to happen. Like that would be a horrible way to live. I wanted to be strong so that I could also enjoy the good times in life too.
So if somebody walked into your office and they said, Amy, I'm here because I want to be mentally strong, but I'm already tough. How do you help them to navigate the difference of this? Because explaining to me is one thing, right, from an objective point of view, but when you're in that state of mind, it must be much different.
It is. So then sometimes we will literally get out the marker board and draw the line down the middle about what's acting tough and what's being strong to help people redefine it. So for somebody who says, gosh, I've gone my whole life without never needing anyone, and that might come from their childhood. It might have been something that they learned when they were 7. You can't count on people. So therefore, as an adult, I will never ask anybody for help. So we might have to help them redefine that. Like actually asking for help takes a ton of courage. And if somebody made it into my therapy office, that act alone is a huge display of courage because most people, that's the toughest part is making that phone call or reaching out. Or if somebody says, I never tell my friends how I'm feeling because they might think that I'm weak, we redefine that too. Like how much courage would it take to tell your friend when you're struggling? Or how much courage does it take to have that conversation that says, you know what, I'm going through a rough patch in life, whether it's a divorce or you're dealing with issues at work, or maybe you're just in a rough spot and you don't know why. To talk to people about that is strength. So we just start redefining it for people and to say, okay, it's one thing to act tough. And there are times in life where that comes in handy. If you are a first responder, we don't want you to show up at the scene and start crying when you see an accident. In that moment, you have to shove those feelings aside and get through it. But yet, in other areas of our lives, that same skill isn't helpful. If you're dealing with an ongoing issue in your life, you need to be able to feel your emotions and express them, and knowing how to do that and when it's safe to do that and having a safe spot to do that is vital too.
You know, what's coming up for me right now when you're explaining this is, you talk about strength in, talking about your emotions and things like that. And I'm thinking that there are people, arguably many or most people, maybe men mostly, I would imagine, that would actually think that that's a weakness.
Correct.
Not even just not a strength, but an actual weakness. So help me understand that a little bit more. Why?
I mean, I think so many people are socialized to grow up that way. And I know when I was a kid, we didn't really talk about feelings. Not in my house, not at school. It wasn't really something we talked about unless you expressed something that you weren't supposed to. If you screamed in the grocery store, somebody was going to tell you that's inappropriate. But how many times have all of us been taught our feelings were wrong? Like, oh, don't be nervous. Don't be scared about that. It's not a big deal. And after a while, we start to learn, oh, my feelings must be bad, or just calm down, don't be so angry. But nobody teaches us how to do it. And that is something that happens often in the therapy office is I'll ask somebody like, well, what were you feeling when that happened? And they might then describe a thought like, well, I thought my boss was a jerk. Well, that's what you're thinking. It's not what you're feeling. So to even put a label to an emotion is a difficult thing for a lot of us to do. We weren't taught how to identify how we feel, let alone put a label to it, or to also to attach that physical feeling that a lot of us get. When I get nervous, like I can feel it in my stomach, like I just feel physically ill. Other people, they'll get a headache or somebody else's heart might start to race. And just starting to put all of those pieces to the puzzle together and then learning how do you calm down. There are a lot of different ways to calm your physiological response, but there's also strategies to deal with the anxious thoughts that pop in your head. So sometimes it just starts with some education, like emotions are normal. We all have them. And learning how to recognize them and acknowledge them. And then how do you express them in a healthy way? Those are all skills and tools that most of us just weren't taught. But to do that just means you're human. It means you're normal. And we all have those emotions, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. But I have a lot of kids that would come into my therapy office too and say, well, like my parents never get sad. Or the only feeling that my parents ever have might be anger because they yell, but they're never sad. Or they don't get nervous about anything. So they don't know how it is that I feel. And it's just because as adults, we also don't know how do you talk about it? How do you normalize that, of course, we all get anxious sometimes, or that we all have sad days, or that we feel bad about something and maybe don't even know why. But until we start talking about it, other people feel isolated too. They think, oh, my friends are always doing so well or they're so happy. And of course, social media hasn't made this any easier because everybody's talking about how great their lives are. So, despite the fact that we talk so much more about mental health these days and we're supposed to be more open about it, I don't think we're always open about the right things. People are kind of like, oh, everybody has anxiety. It's not a big deal. But they aren't really differentiating, say, between normal anxiety and an anxiety disorder. Or we aren't talking about, yes, it's normal to be sad, but what do you do with those sad feelings?
That's interesting. You know, till having this conversation, this very moment, like I've kind of been in tune, I think, with what it is that you're saying, and I relate it to like being nervous versus having anxiety, or being sad versus having depression, right? And I feel like these terms are thrown around, and please correct me if I'm wrong. These are like layperson's observations trying to navigate a complicated world, right? And so I feel like sometimes I have to, especially with my kids, like I really need to decipher, you know, if they say they're anxious about something, you know, really kind of question and get curious about it and say, are you anxious or are you nervous? Am I going about that the right way, Amy, or is there a different way I should be navigating that?
I think that's a great way to do it. So we know that just putting a name to an emotion takes a ton of the sting out of it. And research will show that once you can label it, suddenly your brain and your body's like, oh, that's why my stomach is kind of churning right now. It's anxiety because I'm nervous about a test I have next week. Or I'm nervous about that conversation I had yesterday that didn't go well. But when you can label that as anxiety, suddenly your brain's like, oh, okay, I don't need to panic. We're not having a heart attack, or we don't have this other like thing going on. That's all that it is. And you instantly feel a little bit better. And when we can start making more sense of like, okay, that's what it is, when you can put a label on it, and then you can start to talk about it too. Like a kid who can say, you know, I'm really frustrated right now, is much less likely to kick you in the shins. And because they know, like, this is how I'm going to tell you that I'm angry. I don't have to show you. And I work with a lot of kids with behavior problems, and it's just the inability to really identify and explain what they're feeling. And of course, then they need an adult who can say that that's understandable that you'd feel that way, even if it feels out of proportion or you think they're being a bit dramatic. To a 8-year-old or a 12-year-old, that emotion is just as real as we have when we're worried or sad about something too.
Amy, what moment or realization first made you aware of your own relationship with mental strength?
So I was a therapist and I thought, like, this is great. I've been through pretty good life. Things are good and I'm going to help other people deal with their problems. But I was like 22 when I came out of grad school and started working, and definitely overestimated myself. And it was that same year that my mom passed away suddenly. And she'd had a brain aneurysm. And so she had been completely healthy. I had spoken to her on the phone earlier that evening. But she and I have been incredibly close. And when I lost her, and I start like using all the tools and skills and strategy that I had learned in graduate school, it was this horrifying moment of, wow, all of these things that you're teaching people really don't do a ton of good when you feel like you're struggling and you feel like you're full of grief and despair and hopelessness in that moment. It felt like I was just putting a Band-Aid on an axe wound. And one of the things I had learned as a clinical social worker was like really build on people's strengths. So when somebody comes into your therapy office, you just identify the couple of things you're doing well, point that out to them, tell them to keep doing those certain things so that they feel good and they leave and they keep doing them. And it was after I lost my mom that I was like, well, first of all, I don't want a list of things I should do today. I felt awful. And I still had to go to work every day. I took a couple days off for bereavement time, but that was it. And second of all, I thought, if I went to a trainer and they told me to run on the treadmill, I'd happily do that if I really wanted to get in shape. But I'd be incredibly upset if they didn't tell me to stop eating jelly donuts and I was eating a handful of jelly donuts every day. Like, I'd rather give up the extra jelly donuts than spend 4 more hours on the treadmill. And that's what really then made me think, okay, it's not always about what people do. It's sometimes about what they don't do. And that was what I learned from a lot of the people in my therapy office. Sometimes people had been through incredible circumstances that were just really hard, and yet they were still full of hope, and they were still coming in to see me because they thought, I want to make my life better. And I would see other people who just felt like something horrible had happened in their life at some point and that they just never really were able to work through it. And when I looked at what the difference was, it wasn't about what people did. Sometimes it was about what they didn't do. And that's what set me on the path to say, I'm going to learn more about mental strength and what it takes to be strong. Because I think in grad school, I still even learned about these superficial strategies that I thought were going to be helpful, but I just didn't find them to be in the moment when I was really struggling the most.
Which I'm presuming is why you titled the book 13 Things That Mentally Strong People Don't Do versus these are the things that mentally strong people do.
Yeah. And, actually, I didn't intend to even write the book when the 3-year anniversary exactly of the day my mom died, my 26-year-old husband had a heart attack and died, which had been my biggest fear. After losing my mom, I just kept thinking, like, I saw my dad. My parents had been married since they were 18 and 19, and I saw my dad widowed. And I just thought, like, gosh, I can't imagine what that would be like. And what would my life be like if I ever lost my husband? And then sure enough, on the 3-year anniversary, he had a heart attack. He didn't have any history of heart problems that we knew of either. And so much like losing my mom, he like literally disappeared. He was here one day and gone the next. And it was at a like really low point in my life. I had gone through some other things a few years later, and I wrote myself the letter of what mentally strong people don't do. I had zero plans of ever writing a book. It was just, that's what I needed in that moment, is I thought, I don't need a list of what to do. If I'm going to get through today, I just need a list of what to avoid. And that's what got me through it. And then I kind of only published it online on a whim, and it went viral and I got a book deal out of it. But it was really about what helped me. I had written other articles before, but this one was the only one that was really personal. And I didn't give the backstory of why I wrote it. I literally just wrote the list of the 13 things, but it was what I needed in that moment. And I thought 5 people would read it, but 50 million people read the article. So it just showed me that, yeah, other people are interested in knowing too. Just don't do these things and somehow you'll get through today. And then if you start giving up these things, then life gets a lot better.
What was your original intent with that letter? Was it something to keep in your back pocket and just pull out when you needed it? Or was it like what was it? What was the actual intent?
We had just learned that my father-in-law was diagnosed with terminal cancer. It was prostate cancer. So they had told us that he'd beat it. He was in his early 70s. So they said, no problem, we have this. And after a few weeks, it just continued to spread. And it was the day that they had said, yeah, there's actually nothing we can do. It's spread and we can't stop this. And they gave him a pretty poor prognosis of a couple of weeks. And it was in that moment that I thought, I can't do this again. And I had lost my mom and I had lost my husband so suddenly. And this time I knew like what was coming. I knew what to expect. And I thought, I can't lose one more person. And obviously I didn't have a choice. But in those days where I just kept thinking, I can't do this. I have grieved for so long. My heart is broken. I can't. But it wasn't like I had an option. And it was like one of those days that I wrote that letter that said, okay, you don't have to do 800 things today, but if you just don't do these things, you'll get through it. And I did. Whenever I was struggling in the days after that, I just took it out and I read the list. Like, okay, just don't feel sorry for yourself and you'll get through today. And when I read the list, I thought, this is doable. I can manage this today. And that was just my goal, was like, how am I going to make sure that I get through this the best that I can? And that list helped me. And so I just thought, maybe it'll help somebody else. But originally it was just to help me get through those really tough times. Because again, I knew I had a matter of weeks left with my father-in-law. I didn't want to spend them feeling like I couldn't function. I knew that I somehow had to get up every day, had to go to work, had to function somehow, even though I knew it was coming.
We're going to get into the 13 things here in a minute, but a couple more things surrounding, this conversation. So when it comes to grief, sounds like you've been through this a lot, and I know that grief from personal experience. I know how difficult grief can be to navigate, especially for people who might think that they're mentally tough, or how do we put it, acting tough, right, versus mentally strong. I'm curious to help people out there in the audience identify where they might be in a situation like this. Maybe they are experiencing grief. What is the difference, and what does grief look like for somebody who's acting tough versus who's mentally strong?
So our tendency is to, when we're acting tough, is we just want to go around the pain. So it might be a matter of just like ignoring it, pushing it away, pretending it doesn't exist, to do anything you can to not feel. And sometimes when we try to push everything down, it comes out more like irritability and anger, where you get frustrated, where you struggle to have patience. It's difficult to hold it all in. You might end up blowing up at people. And anger can be part of healthy grief too, but it comes with all the other emotions. It might be the sadness, the anxiety, the fear of the future, the uncertainty, just sitting with all of the lonely feelings, all of the things that come up. And sometimes people will come into my therapy office, and it might be 10 years after they lost somebody, or 20 years, and they'll say, time is supposed to heal everything, but it didn't heal me. Why? And part of that is because they've been acting tough for 10 or 20 years. And the sad part is then they really haven't even started allowing themselves to grieve, which means they're not even there yet when it comes to working on themselves and healing. And grief is just so messy and uncomfortable. And they talk about these 5 stages. It's not really like that in real life. We don't go through one stage for 2 months and the next stage for 3 months. It's nothing like that. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And there may always be dates and anniversaries and times of the year and life events where it just resurfaces, and you don't necessarily ever say, yeah, I got over it, or I worked through all of that. It's just kind of there, and it's going to come up, and allowing yourself to feel those emotions, and then to figure out, how am I going to take care of myself? And to find that balance of, all right, I feel like staying in bed for the next 5 years, but obviously staying in bed isn't going to make anything better. So how do I know when to push myself to get up and do things I don't want to do? Maybe you go bowling with your friends on a Friday night, even though you have no desire to go. But at other times to know, no, it's okay. I'm going to sit this one out, a holiday party that I just know is going to be painful. I'm not going to it. And it's okay to sit that out. And finding that balance is all part of grief too. And knowing that sometimes the most painful things, whether you're looking through a box of old memories, whether you're talking to somebody, a loved one, about the person who passed away, or you're letting yourself go there with the feelings that are painful to stir up, sometimes those are the best things that really help us heal over time.
Yeah, as hard as that might be, right?
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, and I think, I shared with you a little bit, but one of the reasons why, your story and your work resonates so much with me is 10 years ago, in like 4 weeks, I believe, my wife had lost her sister. They were Irish twins, so they were 11 months apart. Her sister was 26. And it was very much that here today, gone tomorrow type of thing. They thought she had the flu. She was septic. And it was so sudden. So, I've had this, and I've always been kind of conflicted, because it's not my sister, it's my sister-in-law. So I'm trying to be the support system, for my wife. And I think that I don't think I've said this publicly before, but this was the first time that I noticed that throughout my life, I think I had been acting tough versus had mental strength, and obviously we're not going to unpack that here on the show, but my point in that is that I think it can be more difficult to be thrust into a situation like that and have that be the catalyst for you understanding where you are. How much do you see in your practice or the people you talk to, how much of it is because there's an event or there's some sort of cataclysmic thing in somebody's life that show them that this is the way that they are and this is the way they need to be, versus somebody who's just naturally curious and wants to improve?
I would say 70% of the time it's an event where somebody says, when things are going well in life, I can kind of white knuckle it and I can get through. And then they're really frustrated or confused why they suddenly hit this wall. And they might say, I've handled 50 other events in my life that were difficult, but this one thing, it really got me. And it might be something surprising. It might just be the straw that finally breaks the camel's back. Sometimes it's a major event, like the loss of somebody you're really close to, and people say, gosh, I would have thought I could have handled this better, or I don't understand why I was able to get through this other event 5 years ago, but this one is just really keeping me stuck. So it is sometimes one of those big crises, emergency type events. Sometimes it's the unexpected one of, I don't know why this hit me so much. It might be I lost a neighbor who was the same age as me, and suddenly you're thinking, I wasn't that close to him, but yet for some reason this one really hit me, or something like that. And then people will then start to wonder, is there something wrong with me? What is it about me? Is it just because I'm hit this age in life, midlife, or the kids have moved out, or now that I'm a parent, it's hitting differently? Or is it just I haven't dealt with things from before, or this one time I'm really noticing that the skills that have helped me in other situations just aren't getting me through this one?
Yeah. So I want to stop and challenge my listeners here real quick to just recognize where they're at, and maybe if they're listening to this or watching this, have this serve as a reminder that you don't have to wait until something comes along and forces you to think differently. This is and can be a wake-up call for you to, look in the mirror or turn that curiosity inward on yourself and just start asking those questions of, whether or not you are exhibiting characteristics of acting tough or being mentally strong, and what the next steps are from there. So just want to put that out there. I have one more personal anecdote that I want to kind of get into, because I think there's other people out there that can use this example in their life as well, and then we'll get into the 13 things. But I'm curious, so I'll use myself again as kind of a punching bag or dummy in this situation. But growing up, I was raised in a household where even from a very young age, maybe 5 years old, I was the emotional support system. Like I grew up with my mom, and I love my mom, great relationship with my mom today, but even she has recently said, listen, Josh, I put a lot on you when you were 5 years old to take care of me. So Amy, my point in that is I grew up, and I think there's a lot of people out there that have grown up thinking that mental strength is the ability to bear other people's emotional baggage. Is that the right word? I don't know. But I carried that with me for a long time. Like I didn't even realize that was happening until probably a couple of years ago. So I'm wondering what advice you have for people that might have grown up in that environment that could serve them today.
And you asked that so eloquently, because I do think that is a huge issue for a lot of people. And they think, well, I should be strong enough to handle that, whether it's some slight mistreatment or boundary violations, or just always answering the phone when somebody calls in crisis, or being the one who fixes everything. And again, it's all about shifting and readjusting and knowing that sometimes the healthiest thing we can do, not just for ourselves, but for other people, is to let them figure it out. So when somebody calls you and they're in a crisis, they're saying, hey, I need this, help me quick. It's about saying, and what could you do about that? Or you should talk to a therapist, a doctor, a professional about that. Or and steering them in those directions instead of feeling like, okay, I'll be right over and I'll help you with that, or I'll figure it out for you, or let me get out the checkbook. And just letting them know, like, okay, so what are you going to do about that? And taking that step back and knowing it doesn't mean, gee, you didn't have the mental strength to always be there for everyone. Instead, it just means you're strong enough to take care of yourself, to have healthy boundaries, to show yourself self-respect, but to also empower other people to be their best too. And when we start doing that, and it often starts with small steps of saying no to somebody, or by encouraging somebody to solve a problem instead of just fixing it for them, or at least pointing them in the direction of a resource that can help them instead of presenting yourself as that resource who's always available. Funny things happen. Like the other person often starts to feel better. And at first they might not, but they feel better once they know, oh, yeah, I can do this. Or when we set a boundary that says, I'm not able to hear this right now. I had a really long day at work and I would love to give you the attention that this deserves, but this is a serious conversation and I'm not in a space where I can hear this, but who else might you be able to talk to today? Like then we're demonstrating to them how to take care of themselves so that they then don't feel like they have to be the dumping ground for somebody else. And that can be a powerful thing, is when we start doing that for ourselves, we're modeling it for other people, and we're showing them, like, you can set a boundary or you can say no to something. I still like you. I still value you. However, I also value me. And when people start to see that you can treat yourself like that, they often then start to treat themselves like that too. So when somebody does that to them, they might be able to say no. And it has this trickle-down effect where people start to feel much more empowered. And it's finding that balance because, of course, we want to be able to talk about our feelings. We want to be able to discuss problems with other people. But we don't want to burden other people with things that aren't their business, or we don't want to depend on them to save us from all of our problems. And knowing that there's a balance to be had. Sometimes we're going to make mistakes. We're going to overstep. At other times, we might not be there for somebody. And that's okay. But part of being in healthy relationships with people is to offer grace and compassion and forgiving people and to work on it and to be upfront about it instead of, beating around the bush or using these passive aggressive tactics of, I just won't answer the phone for a month instead of telling you to your face, actually, I don't want to discuss that. And again, amazing things happen when we start to be more open and honest and direct with people.
I love the way that you put that. And fair to note that a lot of the things that you used as examples in there are things that I've personally lived, and had to recognize and break free from. And now I can see, I recently in the last couple of years learned about the drama triangle, right? I can see where my rescuer had been kind of not serving me and not even serving the people that I thought I was rescuing, and so as you're talking, it's fun being able to, understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Because like 3 years ago, I would have had no idea. And probably to the point I'm trying to make to the audience now, probably wouldn't have been as open to the conversation. So super, super important. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Again, it's something that probably we've all struggled with at one point or another, overstepping or needing to step up more and finding that balance, but some people more than others, and often it does come from childhood.
All right. We're going to get into the 13 things here that you've explained probably 8,000 times on several different shows and to even more people. But 13 things that mentally strong people don't do. What I'd like to do, Amy, is I'd like to just kind of go down the list here real quick so my audience knows what these 13 things are. And then if you wouldn't mind, we could go through each one. You could give a couple, kind of maybe like an overview of what it means and how they can use it in their everyday life.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right. So just top to bottom, we've got number 1, don't waste time feeling sorry for yourself. Don't give away your power. That's number 2. Number 3 is don't shy away from change, something I don't struggle with, and people tell me all the time I need to stop. I need to stop. So number 4, don't focus on things you can't control. Number 5, don't worry about pleasing everyone. 6, don't fear taking calculated risks. 7, don't dwell on the past. 8, don't make the same mistakes over and over. 9, don't resent other people's success. 10, don't give up after the first failure. 11, don't fear alone time. 12, don't feel the world owes you anything. And finally, 13, don't expect immediate results. So I shared with you just before we were on the show here that we started recording, that I see these things as almost obvious when you read them from a list like this, right? People are like, oh yeah, no, obviously I know that. In practice, it's so different. And I know this because I've personally used this as a compass to navigate some of the things in my life. And once you start doing that with intention, I feel like you, at that point, understand how difficult it actually is. So I just want to say that.
Thank you. Because, that's the thing, I think, seeing it all in one place, even when I wrote the list and being able to look at it in one place, it was like, all right, this seems obvious and it seems doable. Yet at the same time, I mean, I've been speaking about this list now for 13 years, and I still find myself doing them sometimes, even though I talk about them, I write about them, and I warn other people of the consequences of doing them. But it's just tough to not do them sometimes.
Yeah, human condition, I imagine.
Correct.
All right, so let's go down. Let's talk first real quick about the don't waste time feeling sorry for yourself. This is a good number 1, by the way.
And, and the reason that's number 1 is because that's where I was when I wrote that list, is I'm thinking, this isn't fair. Like, I'm going to lose my father-in-law. Like, I've lost too many people. Why me? Blah, blah, blah. But it's really about recognizing that when we feel sorry for ourselves, we start to become helpless and hopeless, and we see ourselves as just victims of horrible circumstances in life, and we exaggerate how bad things are, and we underestimate how well we're going to be able to cope with it. So while it's healthy to be sad and to feel all of those emotions, self-pity is when we start to think, well, and there's nothing I can do about it, and the universe is punishing me, and bad things are just going to keep happening. And it's all of those thoughts that are unrealistic. That's when it starts to cross over into the self-pity realm and becomes unhealthy.
Yeah, and I imagine, I'm not going to jump to any conclusions, so I'll phrase it as a question. Are we seeing this more today in society than we have in the past? The things that you mentioned with social media, and I'll throw mainstream media in there as well. I mean, there's so much division and all of this kind of stuff, and I've noticed it from several people who I never thought of as victims before, kind of falling into that trap. And is that the same thing, feeling sorry for yourself and being a victim?
It is. And, obviously some people really are victimized in various ways. But if you see yourself as a victim, something incredible happens in life. You will find proof of it, just like with everything else, right? And you will start to walk through life thinking, everybody's being mean to me. It's because of X, Y, or Z, or people like me can never get ahead, or I'm struggling so much in life because of where I came from and what I've been through. And it becomes really easy to then think, and there's nothing I can do about it, and my situation is going to stay horrible and awful. And as a society, I do think that we reward people a lot of times, whether it's with attention on social media, or we're just helping people kind of stay stuck by convincing them that they shouldn't do anything about their circumstances. And granted, I wasn't around during the Great Depression, but I've never heard too many stories of somebody who said, I just sat around and really felt sorry for myself for a few years because there wasn't anything I could do about it. Instead, you hear the stories of people who said it was rough, and here's what we did, here's how we got through it. And because there's many ways to tell the same story of whether you barely survived, but yet you found some resilience and you really figured out how to get through a tough time, or you tell the same story about how horrible and awful it was and how your life is forever doomed, and you can't believe that you had to go through it and other people didn't. And you could tell the exact same story with just kind of a different attitude, and the outcome is often much different too.
So then what would your advice be to somebody who is feeling like a victim and feeling sorry for themselves? Because I know that that's a tough place for somebody to just pull themselves out of by themselves. So how would you handle that?
Yeah, it's tough to think your way out of it when you feel like, oh, here I am, and you just start thinking positive thoughts. You're not then going to suddenly feel empowered tomorrow. One of the best things you can do is just to take some action. And I don't care how rough your life is, you always have the ability to make somebody else's life or your own life a little bit better. And maybe you just hold the door and smile to a stranger. You don't have to donate money if you don't have it. Or if you are struggling with lots of things in life, like I know there's still something you can do. And when you do something that gives you a little bit of meaning and purpose and you add value to the planet, suddenly it's just a stark reminder of, oh yeah, there is something I can do. You might not be able to solve your own problem or solve the biggest thing that you're facing right now, but you could at least make the world a little bit brighter. And when you do that, it's just that reminder of, yep, I do still have something to add to the planet. And when we feel like we have something to add to the planet, amazing things happen. Then we suddenly are like, okay, I have a reason to get out of bed tomorrow. And it might just be sending a kind text message to somebody or leaving a positive comment on their social media profile. We don't have to do anything huge, but just those little things can remind us of, yep, I have the ability to make an impact.
Wow. It's funny too, like, and I don't know, I keep using the word funny. Maybe it's not funny, but like this, it's such a heavy statement, right? Feeling sorry for yourself or being a victim, and the antidote, it feels so simple. I mean, really, because I'm listening to you and I'm like, yeah, I go to the gym every morning and I love when somebody else is walking out and I can hold the door open for them. It just gives you a hit of something a little good,
And we talk so much about self-care right now. Like, obviously, that's a huge buzzword. People are like, oh, I just focus on self-care. Look, really, the antidote sometimes is other care. When you're at the bottom of the barrel, like taking a bubble bath is really not going to change your life. But if you donated a pair of mittens to somebody who's cold in the winter, like that could make a difference in somebody's life. And you're going to feel a lot better because your life has value and meaning. And not to say you shouldn't take the bubble bath, but don't expect it to have a miracle on how you feel about yourself and your life.
Your analogies are on point. I hope people tell you that a lot.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Okay. Number 2, don't give away your power. What does it mean?
So this is the one that people talk about the most. So it's really about don't give anybody else the power to decide how you feel, how you think, or how you behave. And this is still the one that, again, it's the one that people talk about the most, but I'll say I still catch myself doing it. Like how often I'm like, oh, I have to do that. Or so-and-so is going to make me do this. Like, no, they're not. It's up to me. And taking back your power could be as easy as just shifting your language. When you think somebody's making you feel bad, like, no, they don't make you feel bad. In fact, I was in a room of therapists one day, and at the time I worked for a community mental health center where the boss worked in a different office. And when the boss called, people knew like somebody was in trouble. And so one of the therapists was like, oh, whenever they call, it just makes you feel so bad about yourself. And one of the other therapists quickly was like, nope, they're not making you feel bad about yourself. That's on you. And just acknowledging that like, even if somebody says something rude to you, like it doesn't have to ruin your day. Or if you have a friend who's always an hour late, you don't have to let them waste your time. Get up and leave or do something different. And just shifting your language. And there might be consequences. Like a lot of times people are like, oh, my boss makes me work late. Yeah, maybe your boss says you have extra work to do, but you don't have to do it. There's a consequence, so you're choosing to do it. But just recognizing that choice, like you're in control of how you think, how you feel, how you behave, how you spend your time today, who you spend it with. Well, then it's a lot harder to blame everybody else for holding me back or making my life bad. So it's a little bit scary sometimes to take back your power, but at the same time, it's quite empowering to think, it's up to me though, what kind of a day I have today and tomorrow and the day after that.
Such a hard concept to explain to somebody, Amy. I'm on the receiving end of this a lot. Like I hear a lot, you're making me so angry. And so obviously my response to that can't be, I'm not making you angry. Right. You're getting angry. So what about on the receiving end? Like, how do we navigate that?
I think it depends on the relationship too, right? Like if it's a acquaintance or coworker versus your mother-in-law. But sometimes I think finding that polite way to say, I thoroughly encourage you to do what you need to do to take responsibility for how you feel. So if you're at the dinner table and a relative says that you just made them really mad with your conversation, well, they have the opportunity to get up and leave if they want to. Or if it's your house, you can decide what your rules are. If it's their house, they can also ask you to leave. So I think just finding a polite way to encourage people. And what would you like to do about that? because you can't control what other people say or do. And if somebody's offended by the words coming out of your mouth, but you stand by those words, then they have the option to do something different. And we want to empower them to do that. If you don't want to hear the words coming out of my mouth, what can you do about that? But of course, you don't want to come off like you're sarcastic or dismissing their feelings. So sometimes it's just about validating, like, I hear you. I understand that it's difficult for you to hear me say those words. And then say something to the effect of, and I'd like you to encourage you to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. If that's what I say, or this is how I behave, and you dislike it, then what are your options? And you might explore that with people. Like, maybe you don't go to this meeting, or maybe we don't talk about certain things, and you can negotiate, compromise. But again, it comes down to having that direct and upfront conversation of, here's what I'm willing to do, what are you willing to do, and trying to navigate that.
I like the way you put that. And for those guy listeners out there who are married and you're thinking to yourself, oh, my wife says to me all the time, you're making me so angry, I implore you to make sure that it's not because you are being a dick.
Correct.
Like, Amy is talking about, like, if you are able to stand behind the things that you're saying and they're coming out of your mouth in an intelligent, respectful way, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's it exactly. So if you are always 30 minutes late and your partner or your best friend is like, makes me really mad, or I feel like you don't value my time and I'm mad at you for that, like, yeah, own up to it and apologize. Again, it takes incredible strength and humility to own up to your mistakes and to apologize. Yet when we're acting tough, we want to act like, nope, that's on you. And we do put too much blame. So it's finding that balance of accepting personal responsibility and owning up to our share. And often when we own up to our share of something incredible happens. The other person owns up to their share too. So even if you think, this is 90-10, I'm only responsible for the 10%. So we're really quick sometimes, especially with a partner, to be like, actually, this is all your fault, or I only did that because you did X, Y, or Z. But when you say, you know what, I have been kind of short with you lately, and I'm sorry about that, the other person suddenly is like, well, you know what? And they start to take ownership too. Amazing, right? But yet it's really hard to do in the moment because we want to be all, nope, this isn't on me. So just knowing that we can take accountability and responsibility.
Right. So one more question on this one. I see this a lot today. Again, kind of almost the same question as number one, right? But I'm seeing in this economic climate, let's call it political climate too, people getting really angry about the things that they see, the things that they read. Some of it justified, of course, but is it the same, Amy? Like, are these people in those circumstances, are they giving power to the journalist, the news outlet, the social media post, the people posting? Like, how does that translate when it's not person to person, but it's like bigger event to person? Yeah,
I'm a huge proponent of our mental diet and like, what are you consuming, whether it's social media, the news, the podcasts you listen to be very mindful of that. And sometimes we think, well, I have to be informed, so I have to watch this, I have to read this, I have to keep scrolling through social media. Like, no, actually you don't. It's fine if you're a little bit uninformed, because I've worked in different media outlets, and I assure you that a lot of the headlines you're getting are sensationalized, they're not accurate, and they're not helpful anyway. So I think sometimes to just back up and assess the beliefs that we have about, like, why am I doing this? If I get fired up and it does ruin my day, or I get so anxious and sick to my stomach hearing about the news that I can't stand it anymore, then why am I doing it? Maybe I don't need to. Like, where's the best place to put my time and energy? Maybe it's in making the world a little bit better, and I'm going to do something kind for somebody as opposed to sit here and watch the 6 p.m. news. And speaking of news too, like, we know that our stress hormones skyrocket from watching the news, and it takes about 20 minutes for our stress level to come back down. Now, back in the day, when I was a kid, before we had things like social media, families might watch the news from 6 to 6:30, right? And it might take a while for you to calm down. But now that we have alerts on our phones and we're getting media all the time, so many of us are just staying in a heightened state 24/7. And like, that's not good for any of us. So give yourself permission to not tune into that stuff.
Yeah. Another thing that's easier said than done, but can be done. Absolutely. And I think it's actually an easy compass, right? If you look at your phone and you get pissed off, put it down.
Yep. I know it sounds simple, but yet how often do people get caught up in the trap of trying to reply or educate other people, or, and like arguing with a stranger on social media really never changes anybody's opinion.
Oh, that's a really good point too. Educating other people, because now you're informed and pissed off, so you need to inform and piss off other people as well. Otherwise, you're not doing your part.
Yeah, exactly. And it's easy to get caught up in that cycle of thinking, that somehow you're making the world a better place by arguing with a stranger on Instagram.
Yeah. All right. So next one, number 3, don't shy away from change. I happen to love this one. I thrive on change. Almost probably maybe a little too much sometimes, but help me understand, help our audience understand what this one means.
So the world is constantly changing, and we're more adaptable than we give ourselves credit for. Yet how often do most people, obviously not you, Josh, but a lot of people who will say, I just can't handle it. And it might be something simple. And even as a therapist, again, I've sat around in a group of therapists before, and we'll be discussing some of our cases. And it might be somebody who's saying, yes, I want to change my life, yet they won't. And we'll talk about the barriers to change and all that. And then 5 minutes later, we're talking about how unfair it is that our software system is being upgraded, and so we have to do notes in a completely different manner, as if we also can't adapt and change and accept these things. And so I think for a lot of us, it's in different areas of our lives. One person might say, well, I change jobs every 3 months and I'm fine with that, but I've been in an unhealthy relationship for 10 years. Or I do these things just because it's always the way that I've done it, and we don't ever look for a new strategy of taking care of our health or changing the dynamics with our family of origin or something like that. So I think it's important sometimes to just assess, why do we do the things we do? Are there changes we want to make, and how would we make those changes? And we live in this world where a lot of the changes that people want to make are the really big ones, because that's glamorous. And we can say, yes, I had this New Year's resolution and I changed my whole life. But that like go big or stay home attitude usually winds up with people giving up. That's why most resolutions don't work, because people give up by January 18th. Statistically, we're much better off to just make small changes in our lives and to then get used to that change. And then you take the next step and the next step. But so many people come into my therapy office and they'll say, well, I don't want to make my life worse, or I don't know if I can handle it if something changed. Like, things are bad, but they're kind of predictable, so I can get through it. And because of that, they'll stay in a bad situation just because of the fear of the unknown.
What do you think of the phrase, if you're not growing, you're dying?
I think that's probably pretty accurate. I think when we aren't trying to change, we aren't doing things differently, and we try to stay stuck. Like, again, the world is changing around you. And if you're like, hey, I'm going to stay back here, you stay stuck. And I've never heard anybody who said, gosh, I'm glad I never made any changes in my life. And in fact, it's the opposite. There's research on this. When they had people who were kind of like on the fence, like, should I make this big shift in my life? And it might be a new job, it might be moving to a new city. And a lot of people that weren't sure what they wanted to do. So they all agreed as part of this study that they would leave it up to a coin toss. So it was like, heads, you're going to make the change, tails, you aren't. And then they followed up with people in 6 months. And out of the people who had made the change, the vast majority of them were way happier than they were before. So then they follow up in a year, and people are even happier, those who actually made the change versus the people who stayed the same. So statistically, we know making changes is usually really good for us. We learn about ourselves. Maybe you don't even love the new job as much as you thought you might, but yet you probably still learned something about yourself, and there's value in that too.
So you've used the phrase "usually" a couple of times in this conversation. So from a standpoint of mental strength, help me and my audience understand when too much change might be a problem.
Yeah, I've also worked with plenty of people who say, I change jobs every 3 months. And it's because, when the going gets tough, I bail. Or people who are in a relationship that they always end after, say, 6 weeks, when it starts to have that commitment talk. And then they're like, nope, I'm out of here. And people who move all the time. I've had plenty of people who say, this is the best apartment ever, I'm never moving. And then 6 weeks later, they're like, well, the window leaked, so we had to move. And really, it's because of their difficulty tolerating like some discomfort, the discomfort of, say, calling the landlord to fix the window, or the discomfort of making a mistake at work and having to address it, or having to learn something new. So they just keep shifting and moving in hopes that they can outrun something. So there is a balance to be struck that for people who change constantly just because they think the grass is always greener, or people who change constantly because they don't really want to be seen. Like, I'll go to this job for a couple of months, but then people might find out that I am not as good as they think that I am. So therefore I'm running from it. So we do see that sometimes too, where it's really about trying to change too much because they're struggling to tolerate the discomfort of having a routine, or the uncomfortable conversations that come with sticking with a relationship a little bit longer.
It's interesting. I'm going to ask you a question that I don't know if it falls into one of these or not, but you kind of just alluded to something here that I know that some of my listeners struggle with because they've reached out to me and asked me about this before. So I think it's worth asking you. I think one of the examples you just gave was if they are pretending to know something. So essentially imposter syndrome, right? So I want to kind of, if you could touch on that a little bit, I'm really curious where that falls in this dynamic of mental strength, because I've experienced this myself too. And arguably, you know, I've had a lot of success, and, you know, but I still, like, I'll walk into a room and be like, I don't think I should be here. Like, so what, how do we navigate that?
Oh, you know, and I think that it's not a bad thing. I think all of us have experienced it. I know I have. I came from a trailer park in rural Maine, and now I get to go to like these amazing events all across the world, and I sold all these books, and I get to do cool stuff that I wouldn't have even dreamed about a decade ago. So I do have those moments of like, oh, am I really worthy to walk into this room? And I don't think it's a bad thing. Like, I think it would actually be more disturbing if you said to yourself, like, I 100% deserve everything I get, and I'm the smartest one in the, like, if you just got a promotion and you're like, yep, I'm going to nail everything about this. Like, you don't want to be overconfident. But on the other hand, when it comes to imposter syndrome, one of the best things I find that helps with it is to just mentor somebody else. So let's take writing books. I've now written books for like 12 years. I'm writing my 7th book right now. I still think, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. And then I remember I've come a really long way. I actually didn't know what I was doing when I wrote the first book. But if I turn around and I help somebody else, and I get a lot of emails from people who want to become authors, and I'll offer them information on everything from how do you get an agent to how do you actually write the book. And as I'm talking to other people, I'm reminded, oh yeah, I have learned a few things in the past few years. And the same could be said for being a therapist. Sometimes I'm like, gosh, there's so many people out there who are so much smarter than I am, and they're probably so much more helpful. But then I'll see a new therapist that I get to mentor, and I'm like, oh, I remember having those exact same questions when I first became a therapist. Now I know the answers, and I have the confidence, and I know how to handle these tricky situations. So I think anytime we can mentor somebody, it just reminds us of how far we've come. And when you have that feeling first thing, when somebody's brand new to their career, maybe you then mentor somebody who's still in a college or a high school student, or somebody who's not quite there yet. And just as a reminder of, oh, I do have some knowledge. Because it's great to be surrounded by people who are smarter, more experienced than you, and people who really know what they're doing, because that can help us all. But at the same time, it's good to turn around and help somebody else. And that will just remind you of how much knowledge, skills, the tools, the things that you really do have now too.
There's a lot in here that can be solved by helping other people.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, number 4. Don't focus on things you can't control. It's very stoic of you. Help us understand.
So there's so many times in life that our suffering really comes from approaching a problem from the wrong angle. So if somebody in your life has a problem, let's say you have a friend with a gambling addiction, often our approach is to then be like, I'm going to convince my friend to stop gambling, right? When in reality, you can't control your friend. So if you're uncomfortable that you're sitting at the dinner table and your friend's taking out their phone and you know they're making bets, the better strategy is, how am I going to manage myself right now? Maybe you don't go to dinner with your friend anymore. Maybe you decide, I'm going to take some deep breaths. So I always encourage people to ask yourself the question, like, do I need to solve the problem, or do I need to solve how I feel about the problem? And when you get better at answering that question, life gets way better. And the truth is, we all get it wrong sometimes. We try to convince somebody else to change their behavior, or we try to micromanage something, or we think if I just research and plan and I know exactly what to do, then I don't have to have anxiety, when really we should be just trying to manage our feelings about the problem. And other times we do the opposite. Maybe you have a big stack of bills on the table and you're like, you know what would work tonight? I'm going to go meditate, right? I'm going to go watch some Netflix because then I don't have to think about it. That works in the moment, but tomorrow you wake up, that big stack of bills is still there. So you need to tackle the problem of how am I going to increase my income, or how am I going to manage my budget better? So I think just asking ourselves that question and then reminding ourselves of like, what's really within my control. And it's when we step outside those boundaries and we answer that question incorrectly and we try to control too much, that actually makes our anxiety worse. The more that we try to control things that we can't, the more anxious we get, and the more we try to control things, and it creates this loop that is tough to break from, other than saying, okay, this is out of my control. I'm just going to manage myself here.
Yeah. I love that question. Solve the problem, or how you feel about the problem. Is it also what you do about the problem? I mean, how close is that to solving the problem? I want to make sure I'm understanding and my audience is understanding, because feeling is one thing, but the problem, something's got to be done, right?
Sometimes. So I'll give you an example. So somebody might say, gosh, my sister has some health issues, but she won't go to the doctor. So like, what are you going to do about that? Maybe you call her and you try to convince her to go to the doctor. Maybe you then call your other sibling and say, you convince her to go to the doctor, right? That's two different ways to try to solve the problem. Or you might also just accept she's 40 years old. If she doesn't want to go to the doctor, that's her choice. What am I going to do about it? Maybe you say, when she calls to complain about her health issues, you decide you're going to set a boundary and say, it's really hard for me to hear that, knowing that you won't go talk to the doctor. I'm not the right person to talk to you about this. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore. That'd be another approach to solve the problem. Maybe you don't answer the phone. Maybe you go work on your own anxiety. You read a book. You do something else. Or maybe you spend like 6 hours trying to research what her issues are to talk her into it. Many different ways to solve the problem, but it's about figuring out like, where does my responsibility end? And I see a lot of people who put so much time and energy and effort into trying to get somebody else to change, and it doesn't work, because somebody might say, you know, I just spent 32 hours researching my sister's symptoms. I think she has this particular ailment. It can only be cured by this specific doctor. So I told her all about it and she wouldn't listen. And so then I say, well, then what are you going to do about it now? And they say, well, I guess I'm going to call my brother and convince him to call her next. And they're still just really working on trying to change one person's behavior. And we know from the research that like the things that we think are going to make people change don't. So let's say you have a relative who smokes and they still smoke cigarettes. You might tell them like, gee, this is going to cause you lung cancer. You really need to quit. Well, we know that most people actually don't quit smoking because they're afraid of lung cancer. Men often quit smoking because of the financial aspect of it. They don't want to spend any more money on it. Women tend to quit because they're worried about wrinkles as compared to like lung cancer. You don't want to look old. But you don't know what's going to make somebody quit. And so yet we think like, how could you not quit because this is going to cause cancer and you're going to die? Well, I don't know of anybody who smokes cigarettes who doesn't know that's a risk, and me trying to convince them otherwise is not going to work. So there are strategies when somebody's ambivalent. You might ask them questions like, what do you get out of smoking? Have you ever thought about quitting? But let them come to their own conclusions. But so often we think, I have to tell this person, I have to warn them, I have to talk them out of it, I have to convince them to change. And that's when I see a lot of people end up in my therapy office because they're just desperate. And I get it. When you see somebody you love who isn't taking care of themselves, I keep using that example, but there's many of them, but it's painful. It's painful for us to watch something like that. So we want other people to change, yet you can't make somebody change their behavior.
Today's episode is sponsored by One Accord. They're the experts in helping business owners prepare for transition, succession, or exit. Guys, here's the truth. Most business owners wait way too long. They know they should build stronger leadership teams, document processes, clean up the financial reporting, all the things that we talk about on this show, but they stay stuck in the day-to-day operations and the business just never truly becomes transferable. One Accord's Oasis system, though, changes all that. It's a proven framework that helps you create alignment across your team, build disciplined execution habits profits, which is huge, and increase company value, which is the entire point. So when you do decide to transition, you're not scrambling. You're ready. Buyers notice the difference. Trust me, multiples increase, and you, the owner, get the transition on your own terms. Everything they don't tell you, listeners, get access to a complimentary value readiness snapshot. It's a short assessment that highlights your strengths, your risks, and the hidden opportunities to grow enterprise value for your own company. Start your value readiness snapshot at oneaccord.co/oasis. That's OASYS /Josh Zolin. Again, that's oneaccord.co/oasis, OASYS /Josh Zolin. That's me for your exclusive podcast offer. Back to the show. Yeah, that's so hard. This is another one that hits close to home, and I think that the example you gave is good. I think, but from a relational aspect, it's the people part of it that's most difficult, because I feel like you feel like you can change. Right. You feel like you can control the situation. Aside, like if you're compared to sitting in traffic, right? And you literally cannot move your car. There's always like this little sliver of hope that whoever you're talking to, you're gonna be able to take that control. And this is, whether it's a behavioral issue and you're worried about somebody, or whether, maybe there's a rift in a relationship, siblings or something, or parent, son, daughter, and one of the things that's hard for people to come to terms with, I think, is you can't make anybody want a relationship. You can't make anybody want to mend things, if that's the example, right? I mean, it's kind of in the same realm as the behavior, but in a little different scenario, still involving people.
Yeah, sometimes we just think, if I just had the right words, if I just did X, Y, or Z. And now, don't get me wrong, I'm a talk therapist, so I do believe that there's value in talking. And sometimes people come in and they might be mandated to be in my office because their probation officer sent them. They have no desire to change. But that doesn't mean I don't have any hope. I do think sometimes by asking people the right questions, or by having conversations about what might motivate them, they might change. I wouldn't do this job if I didn't believe people could change. But I also believe that it's not my responsibility to make them change. And at the end of the day, I don't say, if I got 70% of my clients to make a change, then clearly I'm a great person. I'm a great therapist. See how successful I am. Instead, I just, want to know, did I sharpen my skills? And I think if we ask ourselves that, like at the end of every day, like, what did I do today to grow mentally stronger? That keeps us focused on what we can control. Maybe I asked a question. I was a really good listener today. And rather than focusing on the outcome of, did this person change their behavior, or did they do something different? Because ultimately, no matter whether you have the perfect words, which don't exist, or you said something incredibly motivational, like, it's just doesn't have the power to make somebody change. It's really up to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm familiar. Delete, 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 rewrite, delete, 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 rewrite. Right? Perfect words. All right, next one, number 5. Don't worry about pleasing everyone. Now, I'll be honest with you, Amy, this is one that I've struggled with in the past, rescuer, all that kind of stuff. Like, pleasing comes along with that sometimes, I believe, so I think that people understand what it is, but what are the dangers of it?
So I think sometimes our inability to speak up it affects us in terms of, we forget, like, what do I actually like? Or I had the evening to myself. What would I really want to do with my time? Or what's my opinion? Like, somebody says, what do you want for lunch? And you're the person who always says, oh, I don't care. Like, you don't even know after a while, like, what is it I really want? Or do I really like these things? Or I just go along with it because my spouse or my friends are always asking for these things too. So I think there's the danger in that we lose a bit of ourselves. And then I also think that it harms our relationships. If somebody's coming over to my house and let's say I have a rule that I like people to take off their shoes, but I don't want to offend anybody when they come over to my house. So I never tell them that that's what I would prefer that they do. And then they always track mud into the house. And then I'm kind of angry and resentful when I have to spend the rest of the evening sweeping it up. Well, like, if I just told them what it is that I wanted in life, then I would actually improve the relationship. And other people, usually when we're upfront with like what it is that we appreciate, and what our rules are and how we expect to be treated, it takes a ton of the pressure off of them. So they actually feel better and more relaxed because they're all, okay, I know what the rules are. Got it. Don't call you after 9 p.m. or you only respond to text messages after work. Got it. Thank you for letting me know. I won't worry if I text you at 9 a.m. and you don't reply until 8 p.m. So sometimes just letting people know what those rules are instead of doing things that we're then kind of resentful of or we feel uncomfortable addressing later on can be huge. And when we don't speak up, other people don't know. And then sometimes they feel kind of blindsided. And this is why we see a lot of times people are like ghosting each other these days because nobody has the courage to just say, this is what I wanted, or was my expectation, or this isn't working out. Or we see a lot of times when people are just abandoning relationships because they are uncomfortable telling somebody like, I didn't appreciate it when you said this, or I'd rather we not have this conversation or talk about X, Y, or Z. So sometimes just being upfront with people is the kindest thing that you can do for yourself, but also for them.
Yeah, I really love this topic and kind of where this is going, because you're right. I feel like it's an epidemic these days, like people just not wanting to have difficult conversations and really maybe even blurring the line into what is a difficult conversation. So what advice do you have about somebody who is, I'll skip the why do we do this, right? But what advice do you have for somebody who does find it difficult to bring up this kind of stuff, even if it's perceived as, even if it's quote unquote easy, like something as simple as take off your shoes, it's difficult for some people. How can they help themselves?
So I think it's about recognizing that by doing that, by speaking up sometimes, you're showing the other person, like, I trust that our relationship is close enough that you can handle me saying this. And if I say no, you invite me somewhere and I say, no, thank you, I'm going to skip this one, that you aren't going to be crushed by it because I know that you can handle it. And just telling ourselves that's helpful, but also then knowing, how am I going to say it? If there's many ways to say something. So maybe write it down first if you're not used to somebody who's speaking up, just so that all right, I'm going to use an I statement. I'm going to tell you this is what I appreciate, or I'd appreciate it if you did X, Y, or Z, or having a script, because sometimes we're just so used to always saying yes or never speaking up that we don't even have the right words. And then before you know it, you've just committed to something you didn't want to do. And then you don't want to be the person who backs out, but yet you don't know what to say. So just having a couple of scripts, write them down and keep them. And if you're the person who always accepts invitations, for example, maybe your new script is, I'll check my calendar and get back to you. And then you set a policy for yourself of, I'm never going to commit to anything unless I give myself 3 hours or 24 hours to at least think about, do I really want to do that? And sometimes it's those little steps that really help people over time start to be able to speak up and identify what it is that they need and what it is that they want to do, and then to be able to communicate it.
Do you have any tactics as far as like the delivery of it? Like you hear stuff like this, like the praise sandwich, start with something good, then lead into what's hard, and then end with something good. What's something maybe that people could put in their back pocket or in the script that you recommend that they write that can help with the delivery of it?
Yeah, so I think having some insight, and if you have somebody in your life that you really trust, maybe it's a spouse, it's a sibling, somebody that can give you some feedback. Because there's research that when we're negotiating, we tend to see ourselves very differently than other people do. So, for example, there's a study where they asked people after they negotiated, were you a jerk or a pushover? And then they asked the person on the other side of the coin, was this person a jerk or a pushover? And it was almost the opposite, almost every single time. So people that were like, I was too nice. The other person is like, no way, man, that guy was a jerk. So just getting some feedback, like, are you way too nice? And I have to say, like, in my own life, I figured out too, if I'm delivering bad news, I kind of want to soften the blow. But I soften the blow so much that I think it could come across as confusing to the other person. Like, hey, look, you're delivering bad news with a smile. Right. And I think for a lot of people pleasers, that's the case. But like, if you're going to fire somebody, don't bring them in and start asking about the weather and their mother and how their hamster is. Like, just be upfront and deliver the news. And it's okay to say, this is a difficult conversation. It's going to be hard to hear, and then say it. But so I would say first get some feedback from somebody you trust on how you are when it comes to those awkward and uncomfortable situations. And then practice your delivery of, how am I going to make sure that I'm not confusing it. If I deliver bad news with a smile, that's not kind. Or if I raise my voice over something small, like, hey, could you please take your shoes off? Or if I use sarcasm, it's not going to land well. So just get some insight into how you usually deliver things, and then you can practice a bit.
That's good advice. The first time I fired somebody was just like, it was atrocious. I was the nicest person ever. I still talk to his hamster. Like
Yep.
it's, it was so bad, but you learn, right? And you got to do it more often. And I think that's what I would challenge my listeners to do also is put this into practice, right? The things that you're saying. And I love that. Give feedback and practice. That's my favorite part is just find situations where you can do it. Try not to hurt anybody, but you know. Cool. All right. Number 6, don't fear taking calculated risks. Why calculated?
Well, sometimes people are like, oh, again, go big or stay home. I take these huge risks. Occasionally those work out, and we hear about the success story of somebody that risked it all and it worked out, and that's great. But we don't really hear about how 90% of the time that same risk didn't work out for everybody else. So I think it's important to make sure that the risks that we take are calculated, that we're not just going to go do these huge things and hope that they work out. Like, nobody wants to do that. And then if you take a giant risk and it doesn't work out, then you become more risk averse. But most of us weren't ever taught how to calculate risk. So we just do things like, oh, everybody does it, so therefore it must not be risky, or this is how it's always been done, or I've done it 5 other times and it worked out, so the 6th time will probably be fine too, without really stepping back and saying, like, does this make sense? And we all have different things that we find to be risky. So for some people, a physical stunt is no problem. Like, I can jump out of an airplane and my anxiety is pretty low, to be honest. But public speaking used to be my biggest fear. So it would be like, oh, you're going to speak in front of 15 people. My anxiety would have been through the roof. I mean, that literally makes no logical sense, right? Like, I'm not going to die giving a speech, but I would have, my body responds as if it was going to. Thank goodness it doesn't do that anymore. But so I think just knowing, like, what kinds of things do I tend to be a bit risk adverse with it? Money maybe, or with social risks. And then just knowing, like, just because it feels scary doesn't mean it's risky. Like, what's the actual level of risk that I face here? And putting some logic into the equation. We know that we make the best decisions when we balance our emotion with some logic. So just recognizing, what's my emotional state? What's the logic behind it? And how do you make that balance? If all of our decisions in life were completely logical, it would be incredibly boring. But on the other hand, if we only made these emotional decisions, like, we'd never save money for retirement. We'd never do anything that required self-discipline. We'd just be reaching for what feels good right now.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but when you were talking about physical stunts, I used to actually be a stuntman. And so,
got it. So that one you've got nailed.
So I got that one down, but I think, now I'm starting to put together some pieces here in this conversation. Funny. But I think that's really important advice. It goes along a little bit with don't shy away from change. Yeah. I mean, they can kind of be, go hand in hand.
Right. And for a lot of people, say taking a new job might be a huge risk. It might feel so scary. Yeah. For somebody else, they're like, well, whatever. If the new job doesn't work out, I'll just find a different one. So knowing, again, what our tolerance is for change, for taking risks, and then identifying, all right, maybe I'm a little bit more risk averse in this area, but I could take a bigger leap and that would be okay.
Yeah. All right. Number 7, don't dwell on the past.
So obviously you have to learn from the past, but it's so easy to dwell there. And I was right there when I wrote this list. So, my mom had passed away, my husband had passed away, and I just wanted time to stop, because, like, that's where my loved ones lived, was they lived in the past. And after my husband passed away, we had already bought a house, and I loved our house, and I never really wanted to move out of it, but I also wanted to kind of keep it like a museum. Like, I kept his jacket in the place it was hung, and I didn't want to get rid of his toothbrush. And it was fine to do that for a while. That was part of the process of healing. But there came a point where I thought, all right, now I get to make this house my own. What does that look like? And that moving forward wasn't being disloyal, or it didn't mean I was going to forget things or anything like that. But I really had to work on that, because there was a huge part of me that said, if I make these changes, it was like I'm not bringing my mom or my husband with me. They wouldn't know this new version of me. So if I start to change too much, I really won't know. Like, what would they have thought of this? And what would they have thought if I moved to a new city, got a new job, changed careers? And so, like, part of me didn't want to do those things, but obviously, I could have just stayed where I was. But again, coming along with change and figuring things out, it was about moving forward and giving myself permission to do that. But it's not always just about grief. Sometimes people made a mistake 20 years ago and they'll come into my therapy office and they're like, yeah, I blew it. And they just can't get past some mistake that they made because they think that their life isn't as good as it could have been. Or maybe it's somebody that hurt them a long time ago and they're like, nope, that was it. If that person hadn't done that to me, I could have had a good life. But because of that, I can't. And I see people that still punish themselves for things that happened a long time ago, or they think that a label that was placed on them when they were 7, that they can't outgrow it. And so many reasons that people stay stuck in the past in some interesting ways. Sometimes it's about thinking that the best days are behind you too, that they want to relive their glory days, or they think, life was better back then. So then people just kind of rehash the past instead of making their future better.
Where does that fall on, don't dwell on the past, but is there an equal and opposite to that? Whereas don't live in the future?
Right. Yeah. Because a lot of times, like, depression and the past have a lot to do with each other. People ruminate on the past. And it might be, oh, that conversation I said something so stupid, right? And you replay this conversation, or you just stay stuck thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I should have done something differently. And anxiety can do that too. But anxiety often focuses more on the future. Oh, what's going to happen next week? What's going to happen next year? What if the economy doesn't get better? What if my boss doesn't like the way that I'm doing this project I'm working on? And because of that, they're also never present in the moment. So I do think there's that balance to be had. Obviously, you want to learn from the past. You want to plan for the future, but it's really important to live right now. The only time you can change your behavior is right now. You can't go back and change what you did yesterday. You can't make it different in the future, but you can say, what do I want to do about it right now? And that's all about mindfulness, is just saying, be where your feet are. I'm going to be right here in the moment, even though maybe this is kind of boring, or I'm going to be in this moment when it's not the most fun. But that's okay. I'm going to play with my kids and focus on my kids. I'm going to sit in this meeting and focus on the meeting, or I'm going to sit through this thing, and that's okay. I don't always have to be worrying about everything else or dwelling on the past.
Yeah. And for those listening now, cold plunge works for this. Amy opened the show talking about a cold plunge.
Right.
That's what keeps me in the present. Not at 3 a.m. in the morning anymore, but that cold plunge really does bring me back into my body, and it's right there.
You're not thinking about something that happened 6 weeks ago when you're sitting in freezing cold water, right?
No, absolutely not. Nor am I thinking about tomorrow.
Right.
Awesome. Don't make the same mistakes over and over.
So obviously, most of us have at least once in our lives said, I'm never going to do that thing again. And then you do it like 12 hours
Vodka
later.
And Gatorade.
Right. Prime example. And we don't really spend enough time like thinking like, why did I make the mistake? Or what purpose is that serving in my life? And what do I need to do about it to change? And again, you don't want to live in your head and overanalyze everything. But there is a point where we need to spend some time thinking like, what purpose is this serving? Like, what need is it filling? And what could I do differently? And it could just be like, I skipped the gym 6 times out of 7. Okay, well then why might that be? And what can you do differently tomorrow? Or it might be I, stuck to my diet all day long. And then at 7 p.m. I ate way too much and I allowed myself to have too many indulgences in the evening. Okay, well then why might that be, so that I can learn from it and do better tomorrow? But we all do this sometimes. Sometimes it takes some trial and error to figure out what to do differently, what's going to work for us. But so often we want to give up. We think, all right, I made the mistake 3 times, so therefore I'm not the kind of person who can be disciplined, or I'm not the kind of person who can reach their goals, so I'll just give up now.
So what is the threshold of how many times a mistake is acceptable? There's probably, like, I'm hearing myself ask this question now. I'm like, there's probably not a good answer to that. But like, what's the process for that? I I'll use myself as a guinea pig again. But, when I make a mistake once, I forgive myself. If I make that same mistake twice, Amy, I'm pretty hard on myself. So, like, where is that threshold where people can, start to recognize if they are making the same mistake over and over again, and when it becomes a problem?
So I think it depends on the kind of problem that we're talking about. And it used to be, we'll take drinking, for example. Somebody who decides I'm going to quit drinking. Very few people wake up one day, have their last drink, and then never have another one. They'll often say, I hadn't had a drink in 72 days, and then I drank one. But it's really about then, how do you handle that relapse? How do you handle that mistake? How soon do you get back to the path that you were on before? And what did you learn from it? All right, well, maybe I just shouldn't go out with my friends then on Friday nights because I'm too tempted and I'm not ready for that. Or maybe when I go to a dinner party or cocktail hour at work, it just doesn't work for me. So then next time you learn and you say, I'm going to do something different, and you experiment with that. So I think it really depends on the strategy, but knowing that that's often part of the process. Any change we make it's rarely that we are just going to make the change and never struggle with it again. There's going to be highs and lows and dips and 2 steps forwards, 1 step back. So I think as long as we're knowing, like, okay, I learned something from this mistake, and so that I'm a little bit smarter moving forward, I think that's all that matters. And it really just depends on how big the change is. If I said, I'm going to start waking up at 3 a.m. and do a cold plunge, like, I'm really going to struggle with that change. But if I said, my new habit is I'm going to eat a jelly donut at 8 p.m. every day, like, I'd probably stick with that one pretty easily. So it's just knowing, like, what's the change? How big of a change are you asking yourself to make? And then recognizing the pitfalls, why you made the mistake, and what you learn from it so that you can do better.
Yeah, so there's a big self-awareness piece here, to recognize what what that mistake was and what the circumstances is surrounding it, and knowing, how it benefits, serves, or doesn't, in your life.
Absolutely. And, so often we think, well, I committed to this change. How come I can't make it? And we blame ourselves for not having the motivation or the self-discipline, or I lack the mental strength to do all of these things. Well, sometimes we just don't have an environment that sets us up for success too, right? Like, it's much easier to go to the gym when you pack your gym bag the night before, or it's much easier to not eat junk food when you don't have it all sitting in your kitchen. If you're surrounded by cakes and cookies and lots of things all the time, you're going to run out of willpower at some point. So just knowing, like, how do I set myself up for success? Sometimes that's part of sticking with the change too.
Yeah. Well, and now we all know that you have jelly donuts hanging out at 8 o'clock at night waiting for you.
Clearly, right?
So, obviously. All right. Number 9, don't resent other people's success. Boy, this one seems obvious, but we see it everywhere. And I see it in my own life, especially as I started to gain more and more success. And I've done it. Like, when I was younger, I could recognize that portion of myself, quickly turn that into like, how can I achieve the same thing you did? But I know that this is a problem for a lot of people.
It really is. And of course, age of social media makes it even more difficult. You see everybody that looks like they're doing amazing. They have fancy cars, nice houses, and they go on worldwide vacations. Correct. So it's easy to then say, like, where do I stack up? As opposed to, keeping up with the Joneses back in the day was just looking at your neighbor's grass. Now we're like, think that we're seeing inside everybody's house and what they're doing on a daily basis. But knowing too that, again, we can't really control a lot of the outcomes that happen. I'll take writing books, for example. It'd be really easy to look around and be like, oh, I'm not as successful as these other authors who are selling 10 million books, or I'm not as good as somebody else. Well, we know from their research that comparing ourselves like that, like trying to figure out where you stack up in the social hierarchy, like, I'm better than this friend because I make more money than they do, but yet I'm not as good as that friend because they just went on this exotic vacation. It takes a huge toll on our mental health. But on the other hand, if you looked at the same people and you thought, oh, they have skills, tools, resources, things I can learn from, they have an opinion that I could benefit from, then we look at them a little bit differently. Like, oh, maybe my friend who has a lot of money, maybe they're really good at investing. If I tried to learn about their investing strategies, maybe I too could be good at investing. So it's just those little differences in how we approach other people, or we look at them, we think, okay, or if I found somebody that sold a lot more books, I might then ask, like, what were their secrets to success? Is there any of their strategies that I want to use for my next book? And And then it doesn't become harmful to our mental health. It's a small difference, but yet it's huge. And we know that so often we tend to look at other people and we think, oh, I could never be like that. Well, the truth is, if we chose to live a lifestyle like somebody else, if we said, all right, I'm going to go to the gym 6 hours a day, then I too could do some of these things, perhaps. Obviously, biology, genetics, there's things that also are factors to take into consideration. But just knowing, like, I could learn from somebody else, but also somebody's wealth or their physical appearance doesn't make them better than I am. We're all human beings. We all have strengths. We all have areas of weakness, and that's okay. That's just part of being human. And sometimes it takes some conscious effort to reframe the way that we see other people and the way that we think that we stack up against them.
What's going on in somebody's mind when they see somebody else's success and they begin to turn to this envy? Like, what is it that's happening? And I'm looking, Amy, for a trigger. If anybody does struggle with this, I'm looking for something that they can point to say, oh, it's happening.
So it's often this idea that not only do you have something that I want, but you're taking it away from me. Right? Once we start to think that. So if I said, gosh, Josh, your podcast is a million times more successful than mine, so therefore all the listeners like you better, I'm not as good, then I would convince myself there's only so many listeners. And it really goes back to that abundance versus scarcity mindset. So I'm like, oh, Josh, you're stealing all the listeners on the planet. You're a bad person because you're taking up all of these people that could be listening to my show. And I suddenly feel bad. If I just reminded myself, like, there's plenty of human beings on the planet, and if they all listen to podcasts, if they like your show, maybe they'll like my show. So then it just becomes reminding yourself, like, sunshine, there's plenty of it to go around. If the sun's on your face, it doesn't mean I can also have the sun on my face. And when we tell ourselves these things of like, all right, just because you have success doesn't mean I can. You're running your own race, you're in your own lane. I'm not even competing against you. Like, so many times we look at somebody on social media like they're our competitor, but like, we're not running the same race. They're not even playing the same game. And yet we think that somehow we're directly competing against them. So I think just reminding ourselves of that, catching ourselves when we start to think, who's more worthy? Well, this person shouldn't have that, and I should. Or I'm more deserving than somebody else. That's when it starts to become really unhealthy for us.
All right, number 10, don't give up after the first failure.
It's really easy to think, well, it just wasn't meant to be. If you launch a business and it doesn't work out, and you think, well, I wasn't meant to be an entrepreneur. Or you start out on this path to do something different in your life, and it just, for whatever reason, you think after a few weeks, like, gosh, I'm not really comfortable here. Wasn't meant to be. I don't fit in. Therefore, I give up. But rarely does any success story not have a winding path where somebody failed several times and you had to figure it out. Like, what do I want to do differently? How am I going to recover from this? And just knowing that, and I think deep down we all know that failure is often part of it. But yet it's embarrassing in the moment. It's tough in the moment. We don't want anybody to know that we failed, or we think, I can't handle it if I fail again. Or if I do fail, then what are people going to think? So then we want to give up. So it's about reminding yourself, okay, other people have been there and I can handle it. And what did I learn from it? And how do I pick up the pieces and move forward?
How do you see, or how do you coach people to look at failure? Like, what do you tell them to see failure as? Is it a stepping stone? Is it something they learn from? Is it failure? But like, what they get from it? Help me understand that process.
So I guess it depends. So sometimes what people consider failure is just somebody else's opinion. And if that's the case, like, I didn't get into the grad school of my choice. I can remember at the time being like, oh, awesome. Like, I didn't want to tell anybody. Well, I happen to know now that school that said no to me has my book on their recommended reading list. But like, until that happened, it was like, I'm a failure. Like, somebody literally wouldn't let me pay to go to school there, right? They wouldn't take my money. And it didn't feel good. But it was really just somebody's opinion. I don't know who read the application and said, no, thank you. So I think sometimes it's about that, putting that into perspective. Like, is it just somebody's opinion? Like, you applied for a loan, they said no. Well, maybe that was just somebody's opinion. Or is it, is your failure a mistake because of a mistake that you made. Maybe you didn't have enough knowledge. Maybe you didn't have the tools. You didn't have the resources. Is there something that you learned from it so that you can do better next time? And sometimes it is just a stepping stone of, oh, I was going to market my new product this way. That didn't work out. So what am I going to do next time? And you just learned what didn't work. Now you have more knowledge and tools to move forward. So sometimes it is a stepping stone, but sometimes too, I think it can just be a challenge to be overcome, but also might be a roadblock. Maybe you know too, maybe this is just not the time in my life. If you spent the money that you had on the business and it didn't work out, you might not have the ability to just pick up and try business number 2 tomorrow. You may have to wait a while. So you say, well, what is it teaching me? And this is going to teach me some patience. This is going to teach me how to handle the embarrassment of going back and finding a 9-to-5 job when I told everybody I wasn't going to. And I think that's okay to sometimes just say, what do I learn from this? And sometimes it's just a lesson in personal growth too.
Thank you for keeping this so candid and practical. I don't get, and I think one of the reasons why I loved your book so much is I don't get a lot of the same fluff that I get from a lot of other books that I read. If I panned my camera over here, you'd see like 400 books on this bookshelf, and it's refreshing, if I might say, like just to have such a straightforward opinion and thought process on this kind of stuff, because it really, at least for me, it helps from a clarity perspective when I don't have to wade through, well, what does she mean by this? Like, you hit it right between the eyes. So thank you for that. I just want to stop and say
You're
thanks.
welcome. Thanks for the kind words.
All right, number 11, don't fear alone time.
So when I talk to the therapy clients, they'll be like, I love my alone time. And I'll say, what do you do? And they say, well, I listen to podcasts and I scroll through social media. I guess the stereotypical one of I have the TV on, but I'm also scrolling through my phone. But they're never really alone with their thoughts. And for a lot of people, that's really scary. Work with tons of people who say, I sleep with the TV on because when things get quiet, my anxiety goes up. And that's tough. If you're not comfortable inside your own head, it's tough to get through the day. It's tough to be around people. It's tough to do a lot of things because you're always feeling like you have to escape the thoughts running through your own head. And I think it's really important to get comfortable with ourselves, with our thoughts. And so for some people, it's just setting aside 10 minutes a day. And maybe you write in a journal. Maybe you just go for a walk without headphones on, or you go for a drive without the radio on, and just allowing yourself to process some things, think through them, get more comfortable with the feelings, check in with yourself. How do I feel today? And knowing, like, what runs through my head when things do get quiet? Am I always worried about tomorrow? Am I always rehashing something that happened yesterday? How am I going to work on that? And a lot of people say, well, no, people don't really have trouble with spending time alone, do they? But there's a study where they ask people, do you want to sit quietly for 15 minutes or submit yourself to an electric shock? And like 25% of the women opted for the electric shock and 75% of the men. And over just being alone with your thoughts. And I think that speaks volumes about where we are in today's world. And you have to actually put in a lot of effort to be alone with your thoughts today, right? It's so easy to always have noise on in the background and to be surrounded by things and activity. But it's vital for our mental health and to help us grow mentally stronger too.
So, candidly, this is my favorite one because I understand the difficulty of being alone with your thoughts, and since I've read the book and I've understood this as number 11, I've almost positioned it as a personal challenge for me to be alone with my thoughts. And in fact, what day is it? Monday? Yesterday I went and did a 1-hour silent sit meditation here in Phoenix, where I live. First time I've ever sat quietly awake with my eyes closed for an hour straight. And I will tell you, like, and I've been working up to it, right? I try to meditate and kind of be alone in the quiet for 10, 15 minutes a day, if possible. But it is wildly challenging. Because Amy, that's only step one, right? Step one is just is being in that environment and allowing yourself to do that. Step two is then being present with it, right? Because it's so easy in that environment to live in the past or live in the future and let your thoughts race. And, it's a skill to come back and focus on, right now or your breath or whatever it is. And boy, like I see how so many people in the world have a problem, with that, especially here, right? To your point, noise everywhere.
Right. And good for you for doing that, because I think that's incredible. And it is something that you have to kind of be proactive to say, all right, I'm willing to give this a shot. And then exactly how uncomfortable that can be to do it. And sometimes it's the fear of boredom. Sometimes it's, oh, my brain goes to some pretty dark places. So you may need some help. So a lot of people will say, I need some skills and tools first. And that's fine. Maybe you need to go to therapy to work on some of those thoughts that creep into your head during those quiet moments. But it can be so worth it to work on that so that you can feel like, okay, not only am I comfortable in my own skin, but I can trust the silence, and that I can just be with myself, and I feel better about my ability to do that.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting that yesterday too, after I did that, I felt so good the rest of the day. Like it was, and I want people to hear this. Like I want people to understand this. Like typically I've got a very high motor. I'm thinking about a million things at once. That's why I cold plunge, right? To try to kind of quiet that down a little bit. But that silence in that meditation, it did the same thing, and it lasted the entire day. I almost operated it like a more manageable level. So I think that's, it just speaks to the power of, don't fear alone time. And it's not the same as being lonely, right? It's being alone.
Right. That you can be lonely in a crowded room, and for people to know that that's not the same thing, but choosing a little bit of solitude and knowing, okay, this is a choice, that's much different than feeling lonely.
Yeah. All right, number 12. We're final stretch here. So don't feel the world owes you anything.
So, how many people are like, well, I'm a good person, so therefore I deserve good things to happen. Or people will say to me, like, you've been through a lot, so that's good that you got to write a book. But like, trust me, it doesn't even out. It's not like going through bad times then makes it that you deserve something amazing to happen. But same thing that also, like, just because you were kind to somebody doesn't mean that the universe is going to reward you for it either. Or just because you invested a lot of money in college doesn't mean you're guaranteed a great job on the other end. Or just because you put in a lot of hard work doesn't mean that your business is going to succeed. But yeah, we all get these kind of skewed views sometimes about what we deserve or how special we are, or that the universe is kind of going to gift us with something, or we deserve something good to happen. But it's really tricky territory when you start to fall into these beliefs, because then you start thinking, well, if I deserve it, I can also find people who don't deserve to have good things happen to them. And then you start looking around like, well, that's not fair that this person is kind of a jerk, and yet this amazing thing happened to them. And it's not good for our mental health, but it's also not good for our relationships. It takes a toll on how we approach things, like, well, if I'm not going to get rewarded for it, I'm not going to bother. And then you start doing things for the wrong reasons. You're looking for praise or validation or some kind of external rewards, instead of just focusing on a lot of the best things in life that we can't see, like self-growth and improvement. And again, those acts of kindness that aren't meant to be put on display. They're just those things that we do in those quiet moments of life.
Yeah, thank you for putting it through this lens, because I think topically this one, don't feel like the world owes you anything, can be a little confusing, because it is like, okay, yeah, no, I know the world doesn't owe me anything, but when you put it through that lens and you're like, okay, this is really about the unset expectations, right? I do X, Y, and Z, therefore I should get X, Y, and Z, right? And I'll relate it to to my listeners, like, listen, what's a good example? All right, I'll use the only one that comes to my head. So like you're extra kind or extra nice to your wife, and you're putting away the dishes and you're cleaning the house, and because this is a common thing in relationships, and I've talked to a ton of people, that are like, well, I did this, and this, so X, Y, and Z, and I'm like. And I'm not even a therapist.
Right.
Like, these are just like, friends and stuff. So I know that this type of thing exists, but it's so easy to get caught in that trap of, okay, well, everything that I want can be attached to what I do for it. And that's just not the way it is. Is that what you're saying?
Right. And that sometimes we do have like this invisible scorecard where we think
Yes,
I've
good way
done,
of saying it.
I've done X, Y, and Z, so therefore I deserve something, whether it is a transactional situation with a partner or it's just thinking, gosh, I worked late every day for the last month and yet this other person got promoted. That's not fair. Well, maybe you shouldn't work late. Or, if you were only working late to get the promotion, like, did you even ask? Boy, if I work late every day, will that get me a promotion? But sometimes we just think that we're deserving of something because we did something. It might not even be what somebody else asked for, right? Like, how often have you heard somebody do a favor or something and then they're like, I do so much for you and yet you don't do anything for me? Well, what really wasn't, you weren't really doing something for somebody else then if you're expecting something in return.
Yeah, and that's such a danger, and it just I see it everywhere. So, all right, good. I love that one. All right, last one, number 13. Don't expect immediate results. Another one I had to work heavily on.
And I think we all have to work on this one sometimes because in today's world, right, you can get your Amazon package delivered in an hour in some places, and so many things come fast now. I've just compared to like when I was a kid before we really had the internet, had to use a dictionary and had to look things up and there was no instant answers or instant delivery on things. So as the world's changed and things have become easier, we often think that like our personal change is going to happen fast too. And so people who come into therapy want to know like, why hasn't my depression gotten better after 3 weeks? Or how come my kid's behavior hasn't changed, even though I've been changing my parenting skills for the past 2 weeks? And in just knowing like a lot of these problems didn't appear overnight, so they're not going to disappear overnight either. It's going to take some time. And personal growth and real change is still going to take time. I don't think we're ever going to get to the place where you get it delivered in 2 hours just because you snap your fingers or type something into the computer. I think the shortcuts that we try to take are going to hurt us more. So it's about accepting that changing our lives, changing our habits, developing new skills and tools and resources for ourselves is going to take a while. And sometimes we need to have some strategies so we can gauge those milestones. If I said I was going to change my life in the next year, I'm probably not going to. But if I said I'm going to change it 1 week at a time and I found some smaller changes I want to make every week, it becomes much easier to stick to those things. So reframing our goals helps to find really short-term objectives to hit and giving ourselves grace when we don't hit it, but also setting the bar high enough that we feel motivated to keep working on it, whether we're talking about improving our mental health or developing a new habit that we stick to or giving up a habit that we've always leaned on.
Mm-hmm. Amy, I'm curious. You have essentially, is it fair to say that you've made it your life's work to spread this message?
Yes, definitely.
About mental strength. I'm really curious what keeps you grounded, right? As the world expects you to be the strong one. The entire world now, with this book and, I saw your TED Talk and, everything. I would imagine the expectation for you to be mentally strong is huge. So how do you stay grounded with that expectation?
Fortunately, I'm surrounded by friends and family who would definitely keep me humble. And so, and I mean that in a very positive way. So my best friends are people I've known since preschool. And so even though I've written books, they don't treat me any different. And a lot of the people who are closest to me have seen me at my worst. And they've been there for me for the times in my life that have been the best as well. But because of that, they don't see me any differently. And so I think that helps. And so I don't see myself as any different. I mean, and I'm doing the same thing I was doing when I worked as a therapist, one-on-one. I just now get to do it on a much bigger scale. So I still talk about the same skills, tools, and resources. It's just I have a bigger audience than I did back then.
Yeah. Well, you're helping a lot of people, I can tell you that.
Oh, thank you.
What's one question that you wish people would ask you more?
So since I started writing books, and I was in rural Maine at the time when I got my first book deal, and I was working in a therapy office with my sister. We were like the only two therapists within a very large radius, but I have since moved on to a sailboat in the Florida Keys where I get to write and speak and do really cool things. And I'm not in my boat today, but most of the time, that's where I am. So I like it when people say, why do you live on a sailboat now? And what's life like there? And
why do you live on a sailboat now? And what's life like there?
so, because again, I talk about like the hardest times in my life, but I'm thrilled to say that like life is really good. It's incredibly amazing. And I think for all of us, there's the bad times and there's going to be the good times, and it's just going to be a roller coaster. And so right now my life is amazing, and I get to wake up and there's dolphins and manatees and all of this really cool stuff that I never even knew existed when I lived in rural Maine. And I get to do things that I like kind of only dreamed about. Like I'd read books about people that get to live on a boat, or I had heard about such things, but now I get to do them, and it's just so exciting. And so I always want people to know, like when you're going through hard times in life, like you never know what might be right around the corner. Like sometimes it's the good stuff, sometimes it's the not so good stuff. But like during one of the worst parts of my life is when I wrote this article, got a book deal, and a few years later, I'm living like my dream life on a sailboat in the Florida Keys. So it's amazing. I absolutely love living on a boat, and it wasn't my dream. So I'm remarried now. My husband's dream since he was like 4 was to live on a boat. And when I wrote my second book, and we were talking about, oh yeah, that'd be cool to live on a boat someday. And as soon as the word someday came out of my mouth, I said, well, we should probably do it because someday is not promised. And so within like the month, we packed up. We had a Fiat at the time, and I had a dog and a cat. And we packed up, my laptop, and really nothing else fit because it was a Fiat. And we moved to a boat in the Florida Keys, thinking, let's just do this for 6 months. But it's been 10 years, and life has turned out to be an incredible adventure.
That is amazing. That's a really, really great stopping point also. So I will ask you, though, if there's anything important that we didn't discuss today, aside from your boat and your Fiat.
I don't think so. I think we hit all the good topics.
Awesome. Well, Amy, where can people find you if they want to learn more, or they want to copy the book, or any of that good stuff?
So my website is the best place to go. It's Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed-clinical-social-worker.com, and you can find articles, and there's a link to my TEDx talk, and all 6 of my books are on the website, and you can find all of my social media handles there as well.
Awesome. Amy, I cannot thank you enough for spending your time with us today and for going over the 13 things that mentally strong people don't do. Thank you so much for me and for my audience.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure to speak to you.